Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're embarking on a completely fascinating journey into the very mechanics of how we learn and understand the world. If you think you've got a crystal clear, accurate picture of ancient history, well, prepare to rethink literally everything. We often walk through museums or flip through history books and just assume we're looking through an unfiltered window into the past, right? We trust that the timeline we've been handed is the complete, unvarnished truth. But the reality? It is far more complicated, and honestly, a whole lot more interesting. Today, we're going to unpack the physical mechanics of history itself and discover how the narratives we hold so dear are often totally shaped by arbitrary physical anomalies.
Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, the sterile history illusion.
We're kicking things off today with a massive paradox. I want to challenge you, right now, to reflect on your own mental image of history. Seriously, think about it for a second. Close your eyes and visualize the ancient world, let's say ancient Rome or Athens, at the absolute height of their power. What do you actually see in your mind's eye? If you're like most of us, your mental image is highly sanitized. It's probably this pristine, incredibly serene environment, right? You picture massive, quiet halls with towering, stark white marble columns. You see solemn, colorless figures with blank eyes just standing rigidly in a quiet plaza. It's an aesthetic that feels very serious, elevated, and untouchable. But we have to ask ourselves, why does our view of the ancient world look so clean and sterile? Was the past really just a minimalist, monochromatic space that looked like a modern high-end tech store?
The problem here is a fundamental clash of expectations. Our modern view expects history to be sterile, clean, and white. It feels dignified to us. But the ancient reality was something entirely different. It was a chaotic explosion of color, noise, and, as you'll see in a bit, incredibly bizarre chemical preservation. Today, we're doing a rapid-fire debunking of the visual and physical myths you've been taught to accept as absolute historical truth. We're going to bridge the gaping chasm between this polite modern illusion and the messy, vibrant, and fascinating physical reality of what actually survived. Moving right along to Section 2, the myth of white marble. Let's travel back to the ancient Greek and Roman worlds, a place where our modern, sterile assumptions are perhaps the most completely, entirely wrong. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that it reveals the pristine white marble statues we all picture, the exact ones that defined Renaissance art and modern architecture, are actually a massive historical myth. No way around it. Greek and Roman statues were absolutely not plain white. When they were first sculpted, they were immediately handed over to painters and covered in incredibly vibrant, almost garish colors. We're talking deep lapis lazuli blues, bright cinnabar reds, malachite greens, and dazzling gold leaf. Ancient Athens didn't look like a quiet, white sanctuary. It probably looked a lot more like a colorful modern carnival. The statues had painted eyelashes, brightly patterned clothing, and deeply tanned skin. They were meant to be loud, imposing, and incredibly lifelike. Our entire modern perception of this serene, classical aesthetic is just a complete fabrication, distorted by one simple thing: physical decay.
The science behind this massive loss of historical data is simple but profound: deterioration. This is the physical decay of organic materials and pigments over thousands of years. The bright colors didn't vanish because the ancient Greeks suddenly decided they were super into minimalism. No, they vanished because the physical evidence deteriorated over centuries, out in the sun, the wind, and the soil. The paints and pigments simply couldn't survive the elements, leaving behind only the bare white stone skeleton of the art. Today, archaeologists actually use intense ultraviolet light and special raking lasers on these statues to reveal the ghostly, microscopic traces of those original pigments still clinging to the pores of the marble. We literally lost the colorful data of the past, and in its absence, our brains, and generations of historians, just accepted the stripped-down bare white stone as the intended reality.
Which aggressively pivots us to Section 3, the train robber mummy. But hey, if natural deterioration erases history and creates the illusion of elegant white marble, what happens when science accidentally freezes time? Brace yourselves, because we're taking a wildly dark, heavily ironic, and frankly bizarre detour. To understand this wild contrast to our fading statues, we need to introduce a totally different kind of science: arsenic-based embalming. This is a chemical process that unintentionally preserves physical data by aggressively halting decay. Instead of time and the elements wiping away the details, this incredibly harsh, toxic chemistry literally locks the biological data in place. It kills off the bacteria that would normally break down a body, creating a totally different kind of historical anomaly where the past absolutely refuses to fade away.
And that brings us to the wonderfully absurd tale of one Elmer McCurdy.
Elmer was an outlaw in the American Old West, but to be honest, he wasn't exactly Billy the Kid. He was profoundly incompetent. In one of his train robberies, he used so much nitroglycerin on a safe that he completely melted the silver coins into the walls of the vault and had to leave with practically nothing. In 1911, he was finally shot by a posse after stealing a couple of jugs of whiskey and a handful of cash. But because his body was taken to an undertaker who wanted to show off his state-of-the-art arsenic-based embalming techniques, McCurdy didn't return to the earth. The undertaker preserved him so perfectly and pumped him so full of chemicals that his physical body became an unintentional, rock-hard historical artifact. When nobody came to claim the body, the undertaker just propped him up in the corner of the funeral home and started charging people a nickel a pop to look at him. He literally went from being a bumbling Wild West train robber to a mummified attraction.
Let's move to and see how this builds into one of the strangest chronological journeys of physical data we've ever seen. On day 1, McCurdy meets his demise in a shootout and gets pumped full of arsenic by that opportunistic undertaker. Then, for the next 64 years, his chemically preserved body is displayed as a literal carnival prop. Unscrupulous carnival promoters eventually bought the body, and for decades, he was passed around sideshows, haunted houses, and amusement parks all across the United States. I mean, he was covered in glowing neon paint for a wax museum. He was hung by a noose in a funhouse. Millions of people walked right past him over the decades, completely unaware that he was a real, deceased, historical figure from the Wild West. It wasn't until year 65 that his mummified remains were finally discovered for what they truly were.
65 years. I really want to emphasize the sheer utter absurdity of that amount of time. His mummified remains sat perfectly intact, hiding in plain sight as a carnival attraction for exactly 65 years. People were casually throwing coins and stuffing prop tickets into his mouth in the dark corridors of funhouses, completely convinced he was just a creepy mannequin made of papier-mâché and wax. The whole shebang only ended in 1976 when a television film crew for the show The $6 Million Man was filming an episode in a funhouse in Long Beach, California. A crew member went to move this glowing neon orange prop, accidentally snapped its arm off, and revealed real human bone and tissue inside. It's just the ultimate mind-bending example of how chaotic chemical preservation can completely distort our interaction with real, tangible history.
All right, let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, the decline of data.
So the crucial point is this quote right here. History is a gradual decline of data. We have to connect the dots between the ancient, faded statues of Rome and the neon-painted, mummified remains of an outlaw in a 1970s funhouse. This is the core thesis of our entire explainer today. Our modern perception of the past is absolutely not some perfect, omniscient window into the truth. Time is an incredibly harsh filter. History is simply a byproduct of whatever physical materials actually managed to survive that brutal test of time. Historians are essentially trying to piece together a massive, million-piece puzzle, but time has burned half the pieces and completely warped the rest.
When we contrast our two case studies side by side, the concept really cements itself. On one hand, pigment decay erases ancient data. The natural elements stripped away the vibrant, chaotic colors of antiquity, leaving us with a false, sterile illusion of white marble elegance that literally fooled artists and architects for centuries. On the other hand, arsenic preservation aggressively locked in the data. It created a bizarre anomaly where an outlaw's body survived completely intact in an amusement park, creating a totally different kind of illusion where the real past was mistaken for a cheap plastic prop. The vital lesson here, our view of history isn't dictated by bad historians or a lack of research. It's almost entirely dictated by the chaotic, completely random reality of material survival.
So why does this reframing actually matter to you? Well, it matters because it should completely change how you consume information going forward. History is entirely physical. Every history book, every museum exhibit, every documentary is fundamentally bound by the strict rule of physics. Data loss creates modern illusions. We constantly, and I mean consistently, misinterpret the past based solely on the leftovers that managed to survive the elements. The very next time you walk through a museum and look at an artifact, remember this. You aren't seeing the whole picture of history. You're looking at the survivors. You're looking at the few physical fragments that stubbornly refuse to turn to dust.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where we stand. We are at the mercy of surviving chemistry. Whether it's the fading organic pigments on a classical masterpiece slowly turning to white dust, or an accidental dose of arsenic in an outlaw's veins freezing him in time for a literal carnival, our entire understanding of the human story is bottlenecked by the arbitrary survival of physical matter. We build these towering historical narratives, entire philosophies, and modern aesthetics based completely on whatever chemistry just so happened to endure.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative question to chew on today. If our view of the past is so heavily distorted by physical decay and random chemical preservation, what illusion is the future going to have about us? When our physical data declines 1,000 years from now and all our digital records are long gone, what bizarre non-biodegradable artifacts of ours will actually survive the elements, and how entirely, completely wrong will the future be about who we were? Thank you so much for exploring this with me on This Explainer. Keep questioning everything you see and keep learning.